absolutely honored to have Miss Joy Lucius on this episode, and we're going to be talking about when God calls your child home before you. So I thank you for being here today, Miss Joy.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor, Megan. It really is.
Wow. Well, I know that you are an inspiration to a lot of people.
Well, I love you. You inspire me daily. You just have such a passion for Christ, and it makes me hungry to know Him more.
Well, I'm so glad for that. So tell us a little bit about yourself before we get started on the topic about, what kind of life did you have as a child?
I say I probably had the most normal life of anybody growing up. And when you're growing up, you don't realize that you either live in a normal situation or dysfunctional. But my mom and dad adored each other. We lived in North Mississippi most of our life. My parents were educators. We moved for a while, and then we settled in Vardaman, Mississippi, so that's home to me. And I have a brother and I have a sister, and we were just a very close-knit family, and still, even though our parents are gone, we still are very close-knit. I talked to my sister right before I came, she prayed for me.
What a blessing.
And so just had a great childhood.
Good. Now, were y'all raised in church?
Yes, we were very much raised in church. I spent a lot of my days. I say I was a church lady in training by the time I was in third grade. I was the one who, my parents were educators, so I was just kind of a natural at helping the teachers. And so by the time I was 11 or 12 years old, I was teaching mission friends and helping with little kids. And I probably babysat every child in Vardaman, Mississippi. It's not my fault, I promise, if they didn't turn out right. But it was just very, very sweet.
Wow. So tell us a little bit about how you came to know the Lord.
I came to know the Lord. It was kind of just a natural progression, but I do have a funny story for the first time that I really realized that I needed the Lord. Like I said, I grew up in church, so it was every Sunday, every Wednesday. And we actually lived next door to the preacher, so it was just part of our life. But one time, some students set the school on fire. It ended up not being a disastrous thing, but my sister and I shared a bedroom, and it was on the back of the house. And so when I woke up to the sirens, we had old-fashioned blinds, and all we could see were flames in the blinds. And for just a second, 11-year-old Joy thought, oh no, I've died and gone to hell. And it sounds like, it's funny now, but it truly was in a moment for me to realize that just because my mom and dad love the Lord doesn't mean I got a free ticket to heaven. I did, but I had to accept it. So for a couple of weeks, it bothered me. And finally, one day, I just walked over to the preacher's house, Pastor Lowell Johnson, and I told him what I needed, and he showed me how, and I asked the Lord in my heart. And it's so funny because years later, we moved, and he was also the pastor in Vardaman that married my husband and I.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing?
That is.
God's good.
That is amazing. Okay, so tell us a little bit about your family. So after, were you high school age when you met your husband, or?
Yes. I was a 10th grader. He was in the 11th. I went to Vardaman. He went to Kansas City. We were rival schools, and so we met each other, and he graduated and went to the military. And so I decided to graduate a year early, and I was going to go to college, and then in 4 years he was going to get out and I was going to be graduated, and we would have this perfect life. And then he got stationed at Columbus Air Force Base. So to me that just seemed like God. So we got married at 17 and 18. I stop and think now, what were we doing? And why did people let us? But we did, and we've been married now over 46 years. Now, it wasn't always easy, Megan, and we didn't always do everything right. But as soon as we were married, he was in the military, I followed him, and we had 2 little boys. I knew what I wanted because I had seen my parents. And so wherever we went, I say we take the SEC tour in the Air Force. We went to all these southern bases because evidently my mother was praying. So every time we moved, I found a church.
Right.
Because that's what I knew, the stability of family and church built a marriage and built a home. So that's all my kids have ever known.
Yeah. So you and your husband had 2 children.
2. We had Jacob, and then he was a little bit wild and rambunctious. So I really thought this is going to be it. He's going to be an only child. But he began to pray about the time he was about 3 or 4 for a baby brother. And I kept saying, no, thank you. And so he had a brother. They're 5 years apart, Chris, and he named him. And so we have Jacob and Chris, and I loved being a boy mom. I don't think I could have been a girl mom. I don't know that I could have done the hair and the drama. I liked little boys, and we loved doing sports and hunting and fishing, and it was good.
Yeah. And so what were their personalities like? Tell us about the boys.
Totally opposite. Jacob still is. He was more like me in personality. If someone said, no, I don't think so, he'd be like, yes, I'm pretty sure. And so he was kind of born with that rebellious, I'm going to prove you wrong. And then Chris came along, and Chris was more like under your wings, wanted to be right there. And whereas we had to always take everything that Jacob said with a grain of salt and kind of filter for the truth and the additional storytelling, which he got from me also, Chris was just hardcore truth. The only problem Chris had as a baby is he was a crybaby. We called him a crybaby. He was a whiner. But he was just very straightforward. But they loved each other. They loved the same things, and they adored their daddy. So even though their personalities were very different, they enjoyed being together and being with Randy. And they tolerated me. They called me, they always said, Chris's favorite line was, Mom, you're not the Holy Spirit. And I'd say, but I know him really well. And so that's kind of how it was.
And you were a teacher for how many years?
23. And actually, Megan, I'm back at it. Only 2 hours a day, 2 days a week, but I'm teaching music at a local Christian day school with little bitty kids.
Aww.
From 2 to 5, and I absolutely love it. I was terrified though, because I had always taught high school, junior high, and upper elementary. So this is a big change for me, but they're so sweet.
Now, were you a teacher all throughout your kids, the boys' childhood?
I stayed at home with them until Chris was probably in preschool and Jacob was in elementary, and we got out of the military and moved back home. And my father, who was an educator and a principal, he was just determined. He knew that I was supposed to be a teacher. So the week after I moved back, he enrolled me in college. And so I started going to college and working while Randy worked, and finished my degree at Blue Mountain College, and started teaching English and drama. And I taught so many people, like I taught somebody you are madly in love
so many
with.
people's kids.
Yes, I taught Adam. I taught lots of kids. I taught it for 23 years, thousands. And I loved them. And they taught me so much about life, so much about who I was. But my thing was, I had seen teaching my whole life, and I really kind of resisted it because I knew it was a hard life. You either have to be totally committed or you're not a good teacher.
Yeah.
And so when it finally came time to make that choice, I told the Lord, okay, if we're going to do this, I'm going to teach the things I'm supposed to teach, the curriculum, but I'm sharing Jesus. And if that's not what you want me to do, just send me home the first week. And so for 23 years, when you came in my classroom, you got whatever the curriculum was, but I always prayed every day for some student to ask a question that opened the door to Jesus, and it never failed. And usually there would be another kid in the class when the question was asked, like, Lucius, why are you so happy? Or how do you think I should handle this? And there would be another kid that would say, well, she's going to quote scripture, so let me just go ahead and tell you. So it was just, he did that my whole life, and I loved it.
What a wonderful environment for kids at school.
Well, I always wanted them to come to my room and feel like, I don't think I was the best teacher. Like, I come from a family full of teachers, and I could tell you my sister, my cousins, they are so much better teachers than me. But my thing was, I just wanted to be the mama. I wanted to be the one where, I remember in school, I had amazing teachers, but there was always one teacher that you knew that whatever you needed, you could just go sit down in her class and tell her what your need was, and she'd try to help you figure it out. And so that was my goal, to have a place where kids could come and just feel at home. And so many days, kids would come in and put their books down and say, this is the only place where I feel at home all day long. Because school is a hard place to be, especially for high school and junior high kids.
Yeah.
And so that was what I wanted. I'm not the best teacher. When they look back at their curriculum and their learning, they're probably not going to say, wow, she was awesome at teaching Shakespeare and teaching grammar. But they will say she taught us how to love each other and be kind and taught us how to be ready to face the world. Because it's harsh.
Yeah, it really is. Now, did you start writing? You know, I know that you've written some books. And did you start writing while you were an English teacher, or when did that come about?
No. It's the funniest thing. I've always been a reader. I was the kid, as loud as I was always the kid that found a book and found a quiet place to read. I would read in trees. I would read in a room by myself. I loved reading. I read the classics probably by the time I was, like all the young adult classics by the time I was 12 or 13. And so I loved reading. But I really never wrote unless it was an assignment. Now, granted, when I wrote, it wasn't that hard. It wasn't as difficult for me as math class or science class. But writing really didn't become something that I did on a daily basis until a few years before I retired. We were in a school system where all of a sudden sometimes you work at places where everybody just melds together. And it was at a place where we just all loved each other and we were friendly. And somebody said, Joy, you should do a morning devotion. You should write us a little morning devotion. And so we would come together in different classes and before school, and we would pray for each other and pray for our students. And so it was just kind of an offshoot of that. I began to write a little encouraging morning devotion. And my first boss, my first editor, he read some of them that my husband shared, and he said, hey, do you think she'd write some things for us? And so I began to write a few little things for American Family Association for their magazine, and they published it, and it was just kind of God. And so one day he asked me, was I ready to retire and work full time? And I was actually standing in a gym with like 100 and something kids. We were getting ready to do the Lion King musical. And I first told my husband, I can't talk. I have 100 and something kids in here, and there's only 3 more teachers. And he said, Joy, they're offering you a job to write. And I looked at my friends and said, I'll see you in a minute. I got to go. So that's just how it started. And now writing is just such an integral part of my life. But I really think I just tell stories. I don't think I'm a writer. I just think I still tell stories.
Yeah.
So that's how it started.
Okay, so tell us about, it was 2017. You and your family were living the American life,
Yes.
The American family, good Christian family, nothing out of the normal. You had 2 good, healthy kids.
Yes. And one day I was at work. I had actually just started, had been at American Family full time, probably 4 or 5 months, and the phone rang, and it was Chris, and he was working at a nearby high school as a teacher and a coach, and he said, Mom, they sent me from work to the clinic, and they're talking like I might have the C word. And I said, what? And he said, they're saying I might have the C word. Well, he had been sick on and off for a while. Both my kids had always been really healthy, and he had had like colds and different things, but he was a coach and it was football season, and so we really didn't think that much about it. And so he said, they're sending me to the emergency room. And we said, okay, we'll be there. So we have a huge family. We called his aunts and uncles and cousins and everybody. And so we all gathered at the hospital. And when we got there, the most amazing thing, God is just, he's just so loving and good. We get to the hospital, and one of Randy's best friends from high school, who we really have not seen that much since high school, he was actually part of our wedding, and he was the doctor on call that day. And so he met us in the hall, and he said, Randy, he has leukemia. He's like, I don't know which type, I don't know how. He said, but his white count is the highest I've ever seen. And so he immediately began to call and find the best place he called several friends, and they all told him the same place. So we headed to Memphis, and our entire family gathered outside the hospital and prayed, and we headed to the hospital, and we got there, and within an hour or so they were like, yeah, he has leukemia. But there are different types, and he had CML, which is a chronic form of leukemia, and the doctor looked at him and said, Chris, most people don't get this till they're older in life, but he said, you'll probably live to be an old man, so don't worry about it. He said, we're going to give you some medicine, going to get you well, and you're going to live a good life. And he did.
So at this point, let me ask you this. At this point, as you're receiving this information, I know that you said you were raised in church. You've always been a good spiritual woman. In the moment when you're receiving this information, I heard you say that you and the family gathered outside and were praying and things like that. What were the things that were going through your mind?
Well, to be honest, what was going through my mind is, oh no, devil, not going to do it. We're just not doing this. And so my children, all of their life, and I say this with utter humility, I'm telling you, because I was probably the most, it's a wonder my parents had any other children, because I was just so rebellious and headstrong and stubborn. And so very early in life, I learned that my biggest tool was obedience to the Holy Spirit and His Word. I mean, He left us His name, His Word, His blood, His Spirit. And so my children were taught to speak the Word. And so we gathered outside and we prayed over him and we spoke the Word. And the Word tells us that a righteous man's days are numbered 70 or 80 years. And by His stripes we are healed. And we are the righteousness of God in Christ Jesus. And so we just prayed those things. And honestly, I'm sure I was probably overwhelmed and worried, but honestly, I just had no doubt that my child would be fine. And sure enough, as they began to work on him and study, he did have CML, and he would have to take one pill every day for the rest of his life. And so within a week, they sent him home. He left the hospital and went to a football game that night. And he married that summer. He married a beautiful woman with 3 children, and they were like his own, and they still are. And he just adored her, and they had a great life. So no, I felt like it was just this. I felt like it was a place in the road where God was doing something. Iron sharpens iron, and you're sharpening this man of God, and you're sharpening his family. And I just felt like it was part of his testimony of who he was. Really didn't have any doubts. I'm sure I probably had some inklings and fears, but it really wasn't that bad at that point.
Yeah.
But things changed.
About 5 or 6 years later.
Well, COVID came along, and of course, he still had to be very careful, take care of himself, but he had always been an athlete. Both my kids were athletes, and so he had to take care of himself, and COVID kind of changed things. And, he was asked to take the COVID shot. He did. And, I struggled with that. I didn't know. Is this going to affect him or help him? You don't know. And he looked me in the eye and he told me, he said, Mother, you have taught me my entire life that obedience is better than sacrifice. And he said, my Dr. Chandler, they were the same age, and he said he sat and held my hand and prayed over me, and he said, Chris, I don't have a clue what I would do with a patient with CML who got COVID. He said, I don't know, it's brand new. He said, so I'm asking you as one Christian man to another to take the shot. And he did. And within several months, his blood began to change and mutate. Now, it could have absolutely nothing to do with that shot. I mean, God is big. He's bigger than COVID shots. He's bigger than COVID. He's bigger than leukemia. He's
Amen.
bigger than anything.
Yep.
So it began to change, and he began to have problems. Eventually, he was in full-blown, he was no longer in remission, he was full-blown in cancer. And so they began to talk to him about stem cell transplant. And they were still just very upbeat, very, this is no big deal, we can take this, handle it. And so they took his blood, bone marrow, and put it in the international donor bank, came back with 5 donors possible all over the world. And of those 5, some of them had already taken their names out. Some of them, anyway, there was one viable donor in Germany. And so they were like, this is not looking good. And usually there's 20, 40, even 100 possible donors across the world. And so they asked us about his brother. And so his brother had had some health issues before, and they were kind of unsure about it. But they tested him, and he was great. He was like perfect match. So he had a stem cell transplant, and he did absolutely amazing. He did great for a year. And then in 2022, all of a sudden he knew the signs, and it was coming back. And so he went, and sure enough, it was back. And so they were like, no big deal, we'll do another stem cell. And as they prepared for that, I watched him prepare. I knew in my heart this was different. During those 6 years, almost 6 years, of battling cancer, I watched God take my son and make him, he was already a man. He took care of his home. He had a job. He, paid his bills. He did all that. But I watched God mold him into a man of God. He began, as soon as he started teaching, he began to do devos and started writing. And so his writing, he actually had dyslexia, Megan, and it was awful. He couldn't read till he was, and for a family full of teachers, that was crazy. We just were like, what do we do? But as I watched him over these years, and God began to mold him into the witness he needed him to be, his writing changed. It went to a level, to a depth that I'd never seen before. And he would send them to me and his wife to check because he's a hideous speller. And the last year, I watched as God healed his spelling. He healed there was nothing. Like the last couple he wrote me, I said, son, there's nothing to change. It's perfect. Send it out. And
Now,
so,
did this scare you?
Looking back, it didn't scare me, but I knew something was happening. And you just have to know Chris. Chris is everything was black or white for Chris. It was either wrong or right. My mom used to say, it's a good thing you teach him the Bible, because if he ever wanted to do something he thought it was right and it was wrong, he'd do it anyway. He just was whole hog. I've seen him, he played college baseball. He played baseball all his life. He played college ball. He played some semi-pro ball. And I've seen him in games where he was losing 9 runs, and he would just go in the dugout and say, I'm not losing. Y'all can go home losers, but I'm not going home a loser. So get up and let's play ball. And I've seen him just rally an entire team to come back and win. I've never seen him give up. In the whole time he was sick, I never heard him complain. I'm sure he did to Lee, to his wife, but I never heard him. And so as I began to see his writing and his ministry with his students and kids change, I knew something was going on. Now, in my heart, I wanted to believe that it was like, man, this is going to be awesome. God's going to heal him. He's going to go around the world and preach the gospel to the nations. And he had done that with FCA and different ministries, and he was ready. And so there came a point at the very end, right before his next stem cell transplant, he wrote a blog and he's called it Surrender. And he said, I've come to a point where I'm just going to surrender no matter what that means. And immediately, within 5 minutes, like dozens of people were asking, can you come speak to our youth? Can you come speak to our men? Can you come? And his wife was like, you got to call these people and say, no, we have to do a stem cell transplant first. And so in my heart, that's what I wanted. But there came a point where I knew that this was different. It wasn't like the first go round. And so one day we were riding back from the doctor together, and he knew that I was struggling, but I didn't say anything. And he reached over and he grabbed my hand and he said, Mom, he was driving. He said, Mom, which that in itself takes Jesus to write, just wait till you have to drive with your kids. And he said, Mom, do you believe everything you've taught me in my life? And I said, yes. He said, so you believe everything you've taught me about Jesus, about his word? And I said, yes. And he said, then you've got to live it, no matter what. And so I said, okay. And so within 2 weeks, he was gone. He won a state championship with his baseball team. He and his wife took a small trip. They came back, and he was sick. He had been bitten by some mosquitoes or something, and he went septic. And within days, he was gone. And so as I watched him there in the hospital, I knew he's not fighting. This is not Chris.
Yeah.
Chris would be like, oh no, y'all need to get out of this ICU room and watch me. I'm coming out of here. But he didn't. And so he died. And that was shocking to me, because truly my faith was, this man's going to live to preach the gospel and minister to students and athletes for all his life. But he didn't.
Yeah.
So that's when the grief journey, that I had no idea the cost and the tickets and the stops she made, that's when it started.
So at any point, there towards the end, did you ever feel a sense of frustration? Like, did you feel like he was slipping through your fingers at any point? Or
No, I really didn't, because it was quick. I mean, it was within a matter of 5 or 6 days. It was less than a week. And so, well, I guess it was maybe 8 days, 7 or 8 days. And so, no, I really didn't. The last time that I went home, we would all take turns staying until it got really bad. He sent me home. He was tired. He was tired of hearing me praying and talking and telling him. And he sent me home, and his wife came, and I knew in my spirit.
yeah,
And so I kept telling him bye, and he kept saying, Mom, goodbye. And I would come back and hug him again. And the whole way home from Memphis to Tupelo, I cried and screamed and yelled. I went by his home and laid on his front porch and prayed with every dog and cat in the entire neighborhood praying beside me. He loved animals, but I knew what was coming.
So what did your conversations with God look like at this point?
At that point, it was probably begging. And it
Yeah.
was mostly, honestly, it was mostly, Lord, because the Lord kept telling me, Joy, this is not your battle. You created a warrior. This is his battle, not yours. So lay your weapons down and let him fight. And so it was, Lord, help me do this. Help me to be able to lay my weapons down at your feet and let my child fight his own battles. That was the hard part. So I did, and he did, and it was beautiful. Our whole family was there. We watched him, and it was peaceful. It was it was wonderful. As far as, a lot of people suffer. He didn't suffer.
Yeah.
It was beautiful. And the night before he died, my sister and I were there, and my sister helped raise my children, and they loved her probably more than they did me. And we were laying there just about asleep. I was laying on his knee, and she was sitting in a chair, laying on his feet. and we'd just about gotten still, and she jumped, and she said, I saw him, Joy. And I said, what? And she said, I just saw him. I had this vision. And he's in a boat, just a rowboat. And he's with Jesus. And Jesus is at the front of the rowboat, just twirling his hands in the water. And Chris is sitting at the back with the oars. And she said, Jesus said, it's your choice. If you want to go back and fight this battle one more time, I'll stir the water and we'll go back. Or I can take you home. And she said, he didn't say a word, but he's going home. And so he made his choice. And I know I was fine. I really was. I have not questioned God. I have not been angry that my husband is not the same. We have different testimonies. But I was okay at first. I really was. I was just grateful because I knew where my child went. I can't imagine going through what we went through
and not knowing
where he was.
Yeah.
I can't imagine waking up in the middle of the night and thinking, is he with Jesus or not?
Yeah.
But I knew, so I was fine for a while.
For a while. Okay, now let me ask this. What did you see, what kind of changes did you see in Jacob and his brother, during...
Oh, that was amazing because the stem cell transplant, Jacob has had health issues. He had a car wreck when he was 18, and he has had health issues. And so when Jacob was sick, Chris became the older brother. And so really for most of their adult life, Chris had been the older brother, and Jacob had kind of taken the place of the younger. And so when it came time for the stem cell, I do not know what transpired between them, but Chris came home one day over to our house, and he said, Mama, I have a present for Jacob. And he brought me my dad. You have to know I raise rednecks. I'm sorry. And so he came in the door, and he brought an old shotgun. And it was my dad's, who had died 2 years earlier, and they loved both of their grandfathers. And he said, Papa gave me this gun, but it should belong to Jacob because he's the oldest. And he said, so I've brought him his gun, and I wrote him a letter. And so I have no idea what was written in the letter, but at that moment in time, God restored the roles of older brother and younger brother. So it was really, for Jacob, it has been a lonesome time, but it has been a time where he knows what God's called him to do.
Yeah.
And so that was, I mean, I'm telling you, the whole thing was just grace upon grace upon grace. Until the reality sets in that you cannot see your baby again until you get to heaven.
Yeah. Now, when that reality set in for you, did your, I don't want to say did your relationship struggle with the Lord, but how did it change? I know, Miss Joy goes to church with us here at Word of Life to give a little bit of backstory. And sometimes she teaches on Wednesday nights. And just over the past 2 years that we've been going here, you don't seem to try to hide what you're going through. So you can see if Miss Joy's having a good day or Miss Joy's having a bad day, and whether she has to teach or not, she'll get up there and just pour her heart out with how much she loves the Lord and
in reality, I mean, we live in a fallen world.
Mm-hmm.
We're going home to a redeemed world, to a place that is perfect, where there's no sickness, no sorrow, no tears, none of the sin and the daily struggles that we live with, but we're not there yet.
Right.
And so when the reality set in that, and we're close, like I told you, my family is very close. Till my mom died, I probably talked to her every day of my life. Christopher, I did not realize this till he was gone. But as teachers, like 3:30 is kind of like, duh, we're free from it.
Yeah.
And so I would call my mom and sister and our cousins because we were all teachers and we were getting off. And then when Chris went off to college, he played ball. And so usually from about 3 to 3:30, he had a free time. And so he would call during that time. So during high school, he would call about 3 to 3:30 before his practices started. in college, and then he became a teacher, and it was the same thing. He was waiting out at the field house between about 3 and 3:30 till his kids got there. So there was always just this little window, and sometimes it was just a call to say, you know, hey, I can't talk long. I'm just telling you, you ought to cook me something good for supper and bring it to see me and Lee, or, you know, just something. He had sarcasm was his love language. And so, or sometimes it would be really a deep talk, you know, Mama needs you to pray for this kid at church, or, this kid on my ball team, or, you know, something. But I realized about a month or so after he died, I can't talk to him at 3:30 every day. There's just this void. And I was not angry, but if you know me, you know I like to control things. And so I just wanted to know, I don't understand, Jesus. You know, explain it to me. I'm 60, I was 61 at the time, he was 37. I'm like, explain to me how it makes more sense for a 61 and 62-year-old couple to stay here without their child and serve you and witness you, instead of a dynamic, outgoing 37-year-old that drew young people by the barrels and take him home. That makes no sense to me. So that was hard for me, just the struggle of how. And so there really came a point where God was just like, you don't have to know everything. You just have to trust me. And so if you've ever been married for any length of time, you know that, like, I adore Randy. He's the most amazing man, but he makes some crazy decisions sometimes. I'm like, I wouldn't do it that way. But I've learned over the years to just trust him, because he's following God, I'm following God. I would have gone that direction, he takes us that direction, and 99% of the time he's right. And so the Lord was like, do you love me? Do you trust me? And I said, yes. And so he said, you got to change the direction of your questions. And so my question was, okay, if I'm never going to understand why till I get there, and then it's not going to matter. It's like, what's the point? It's not going to matter when I get there. Then what do I pray? And he said, so what was important to Chris? And I said, souls. It was souls. He wanted to see his children, his students, and his athletes. He wanted them to know Jesus. And so I changed my prayer. And it's really kind of an audacious, maybe even prideful prayer, but I know it came from God. I began to pray for millions of souls. Millions. All right, Lord, you're not going to tell me why. You're not going to explain it. But I want to see millions of people come to Christ. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but then you think about people like Billy Graham, Adrian Rogers. I still listen to Adrian Rogers 2 times a day. I get his Devo, and he's been gone home for a long time. And so I think to myself, all right, I'll just pray for millions of young people, millions of souls. And so most people who are saved, Megan, do you know that they impact 9, at least just the average person is going to impact 9 or 10 other family members or people close to them. So Lord, we're just going to one baseball team after another. Yeah. So Randy and I go, and we still sit in the same place we always sat. We sat at the end of the dugout in our 2 little chairs, and we love on those baseball boys. And we have seen some of them go off and preach and do amazing things. And that's just what I keep praying for, is millions of souls. And I keep reminding myself that I taught thousands of kids, and I'm just believing that God is going to take what we've gone through, and somehow he's going to use it to glorify him. The Bible says that what we go through right now has no comparison to what we're going to reap in glory for him. And so I just keep reminding myself, this pain is momentary. It's real. It's very real. But it's momentary. And the joy that we're going to have in the presence of God, and the moment that I see millions of crowns laid at the feet of Jesus, people whose children weren't going to go to heaven, who didn't know him, and were never going to know him. They lived in dysfunction. They lived in a place in a family, in a home where they might not have ever seen Jesus without those young men of God. They're going to be there, and that'll be worth it, Megan. It will. So on the hard days, I cry. And people say, well, you know, a year, you should be over, you should start feeling. And I do. I enjoy my life. I teach preschool, I write, I substitute at school, I go to church, we have a new home with 3 fishing ponds. I fish at every one of them. I have a great life. It does not mean that I don't miss my child. I will miss him to the moment I see him. But I also know that this is momentary. And I can endure this with joy because the joy of the Lord is my strength in order that somebody else's child gets to be there. Now,
did you ever, did it ever come across your mind, you know, God, why mine?
Well, I mean, I think in the sense that not why mine because I don't think I'm any better or any different, but I did think about, you know, Lord, now wait a minute. You told me to teach my kids the Word. You told me to teach them how to pray. You told me to model a life of Christ before them. So truly, if anybody should have been able to fight cancer and win, it would have been a man of God. So that was the hard part. And I know that my child made a choice. And, you know, Randy and I, we would go back and forth on this. And I said, I just know he had a reason. He had to have a reason that was bigger than you and me and all this other stuff. I know that he had to because I watched him choose. And so Randy struggled with anger and a little. And so the Easter after Chris died, we were here at church. And church is kind of tough, Megan. I mean, I don't think I would have ever thought that. I would have thought it would have been a refuge. But I think that the problem is when you do bring your children to church their whole life, you see them. I mean, his last birthday, were you here when he spoke his last birthday in May? He died in June. On May, he came, it was my night to speak, and so I asked him to come give his testimony. And he came, his last birthday was spent here. And so everywhere I look, I see my children. And that's hard. And it's hard to think about, you know, I want to worship God with my family.
Yeah.
And worship is it's a solo relationship. It's between me and God. But for mothers, it's you and your babies. And it's your husband and it's your family. And so that's been hard. But that Easter, we went home and I had no clue that Randy was just so angry. And he said he sat here the whole time, you know, I'm like, Lord, here we are, worshiping you and the fact that you rose from the grave and that you defeated death, hell, and the grave. And you told us that by your stripes we are healed and that you taught us how to pray and you taught us how to believe. And he's still gone. And so he had a dream. Now, I have not dreamed about my child yet, and I really kind of have a problem with that. I'm like, I'm the one that suffered for 20-something hours, and you get to have the dream. But the Lord gave him a dream, and in the dream, he said he saw Chris, and Chris was in heaven. He was healthy and whole, and he said even the tone of his skin and his hair was what it was before cancer. And he said, he came to me, and he told me, he said, Daddy, I love you, and I'm sorry, he said, but basically he was given a choice, and he said, I chose home, Daddy, and it won't be long. He said, I'll see you, and but this is what he did get. He said, tell Mama, I am interceding, we're interceding for her. And I thought, oh, how, you get a dream, and I get rebuked. So I know that all of heaven intercedes for us. It intercedes for you. They intercede for me. And they want the same things we want. They want heaven so full because God gave us his very best. He gave us his son. He knows every feeling that he is touched with the feelings of our infirmities. He knows what it's like for your son to suffer and die. He knows. And yet he gave his only son who was perfect and sinless And he gave them for my sons, for me. And so how can I not serve a God that would give his son in exchange for my son? And so that's where we are, Megan. And it's day by day. And some days you get up and it is a party from the start to the finish. And some days it's a struggle. Some days you have to choose. Am I going to worship God today, or am I going to have a pity party? And so some days I have pity parties. But more and more I choose to have a day of worship and thanksgiving. And truly, you know, when we thank him, that is the receptacle, that's the avenue, that's the place that leads us from grief into gratitude and joy. And so that's all I can tell you is you have a choice. You can choose to grieve your entire life away and to be bitter and to be angry. And you know, some people have more reason than me. But you have the choice. And I just have to choose joy. It's the only choice that I see that makes any sense, that makes the gift of God's Son worthwhile.
Wow. Well, I know one Wednesday night when you spoke, you talked to us a little bit about how God had been dealing with you on being so, and you know, that's one of the amazing things. She comes and I've watched her speak on Wednesday nights sometimes when she obviously has not been having the best day.
Yeah.
But she gets up there and she does it anyway. And this particular time, you told us about how God had been dealing with you about your attitude of being so set on that Chris was yours.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I think we all are like that as moms.
Yeah.
And especially like when you raise men of God. And I'm here to tell you, we all keep talking about what's wrong with our world. What's wrong with our world is we don't have men of God. We have not raised warriors. And so instinctually, most women are going to be nurturers, and they're going to love their children and nurture, and it's just instinctual. But we have kind of gotten to the point where we tell men it's wrong to be strong and to be leaders and so for me it was just hard to realize that he was never mine. I mean, neither one of my kids are really mine. God gave them to me, and you know, as Christians, we do this little thing where we dedicate our babies and we bring them and we dress them in their cute little monogrammed outfits, and they're so beautiful, and their grandparents come and we dedicate them and we give them to God. And I can, in my head, I can see the picture of the day that Pastor George Seymour dedicated Chris, and I can see his little overall set, and I know, and in my heart, I did give him to Jesus. Well, we didn't give him to Jesus. He was mine. And I enjoyed Christopher. Jacob is so much like me that life was sometimes a struggle. My mother would say, "Why are you so hard on him?" I said, "Because he's me. And I know what he's going to endure if I don't." But Chris, I enjoyed him. His personality is more like Randy. And Chris had this ability to speak the truth in love. I mean, he would just, and I had kids in my classes sometimes like that would just look at you and say, and you'd think, oh, Jesus, he just absolutely spoke the truth. And so I enjoyed him. And it was just so hard to come to the realization that he was born to do what God called him to do because he was God's child, not my child. I was just entrusted with him, and I got to be with him for 37 years. But he really wasn't ever mine. Not really. I was just the caretaker that God gave Chris to help him and to take care of him. And so it was really a struggle for me to let go and say, okay, fine, he's yours. He never was mine. But when everybody talks about him, they're going to talk about he's Randy and Joyce. So it really was hard. And the other thing that has really been hard for me is, like I said, just choosing. Do I choose to listen to the Spirit of God? And God is...
How does God deal with you on the days that you decide? You said some days you you choose between, are you going to be joyful or are you going to have a pity party? And sometimes you choose to have a pity party. So on the days that you choose to have that pity party, is that well, you know, I want to emphasize on that you know, is on days like that, is that a day that that God just kind of says, okay, we'll sit there and have your pity party, or does he embrace you in those moments? You know, how do you feel on those days that you choose to have a pity party?
When you step back from it, I think he holds you. He just holds you, and he just, you know, like when you have little kids, some days, like today I teach preschool, one of the little boys, he's just having a rough day. I mean, it was just a hard day. And finally it came to the point where his teacher just picked him up and just held him, because reprimanding him wasn't helping, you know, giving him encouragement wasn't, he just needed to be held. And so God does hold me, but God is really, God is pretty blunt with me. He really is. And sometimes I laugh, because if he were talking to me and my sister, he would probably talk to her and say, oh, my beautiful daughter, you know, I need you to, and she would probably listen immediately. But he sometimes has to just go, Joy. And, you know, sometimes he does. I think he just picks me up and he holds me. But then he comes to the point where sometimes he's like, are you done? Do you need a little longer? And then the other thing is, he gives the most amazing gifts. I was sitting in my backyard drinking my coffee last week on one of the last beautiful days of summer. And in Mississippi, you can go from fall to winter to summer in an hour. But it was a beautiful summery morning, and I'm listening to the birds sing. And I got a phone call from a little girl who used to go to church here. She grew up here. She lives far away. She lives in New Jersey. And she called me to tell me that God wanted me to know that I was seen and that I was heard. And if he could say one thing, he would say, well done. Aww. Wow. What an amazing gift. And so he never leaves us. He never forsakes us. And when he is quiet, I think it's because he wants us to ponder what he's already told us. We know. If you know God, you know what he wants. You know what he's saying, and you know who he is. And yes, he surprises me every now and then, but the reality is I know he loves me, and I know he loves Christopher more than I could love him, because he knew every good thing, every bad thing. He knew the beginning from the ending. And so he even knows, he even sees those millions of souls that I pray for. He knows them. And so I just have to trust him. And my sister taught kindergarten her whole life. And so my kids, their whole life, and her child, they've been taught you get two choices. And so we honestly do. We get two choices. Hell was never created for us. It was created for the enemy and the demons, the angels that fell with him. It was created for them. It was not created for us. If we go there, we will literally have to trespass on ground that was not meant for us. So we have two choices, heaven or hell. But every day we have two choices. Yeah. We can get up and glorify God, or we can glorify ourselves, and that's just glorifying Satan. And some days I fall, but the Bible says when I fall, I will arise. And so there's always somebody there to say, get up, Joy. And sometimes they say it sweetly, and sometimes they say it forcefully, but he's never failed, and he never will. And I just truly believe that no matter what, he never will fail me. No, I never believed I would be living this life. I really and truly, to the moment that he drew his last breath, I really thought, y'all better watch out. My kid's going to get up from here to show y'all. But he's showing us the glory of God in a different way. Yeah. And I have to just be able to pray, God, give me eyes to see and ears to hear and a heart to obey. Because as Christopher always told me, you said obedience is better than sacrifice. So no matter what we do, as long as we have a heart to obey, I think it's going to be okay.
Wow. Now, what kind of a legacy has Chris left behind?
Well, if you knew Chris growing up, I always said you either loved him or hated him because he was just straightforward. And so I watched as God, the cancer mellowed him and just gave him a compassion that I had never seen. I mean, he'd always loved people. He was probably the neatest thing about Christopher, which men are not always like this. First of all, he had the absolute ability to apologize and repent, and mean it, and not say, I'm sorry, but he would just do that. But he also loved to give gifts, and he was always that way. And so the day of his funeral, hundreds of people came forward, and there were lots and lots of young men and coaches and just men, and they said the same thing. He never came to see me without bringing me a gift. Sometimes it was a pack of gum. Sometimes it was, a shirt, or sometimes it was a fishing rod or a gun he wanted to share. And I wanted to go, wait a minute, I thought I was just the only one he gave the gifts to. But he was like that, and he gave a gift. So even that is a legacy. Like, I think that those gifts return. He was also a tither. And in fact, Pastor, he may not like me telling this, but the day he died, Pastor was there because he'd been his pastor forever. And in the hallway, as we were leaving, he said, I want to tell y'all something. And he said, I've never in my entire ministry as a pastor ever told anybody this. He said, but Christopher was a tither. And he said, even in this last month while he was sick, he said he sent an offering to our church. He said he would send them from the hospitals. He would send them on baseball trips. When he was in college, he said he never quit tithing and never quit sending offerings. And he said, I just think that's amazing. And so because of that, I know that those gifts are still given and God is still using those. But the biggest legacy that he left is his kids, his students, his players. And I just know that those kids and those students are going to go out in the world and become mighty men of God, women of God, and they're going to go to places that I could never go, and they're going to minister to people that I could never minister to, or that Chris would have never even ministered to. And so I think his legacy is just sharing Jesus and sharing the love that Jesus has for us. And so I cannot wait. I look at some of these kids as they graduate and they go, because we'll have another graduating class here in May, and I'm just amazed at some of the things they say and they do, and I just can't wait, Megan. That's what I love to hear, and I'm waiting to hear, and one day I believe we'll be there when that millionth crown falls at the feet of Jesus. I can't wait.
Wow. And now y'all do some kind of fundraiser. I know it's a bass fishing something that y'all do every year, isn't it?
We founded a Chris Lucius Memorial Foundation. Several people after he died sent amazing gifts and wanted us to use them. So we came together with a lot of with family and some of his coaching friends and friends that he played baseball with all over the world. And we formed a foundation, and we give scholarships to athletes. And we laugh because school was hard for Chris. Now, he ended up graduating college with like a A average or high B, I don't even remember. But school was really a struggle for him. He had to work as hard at school as he did at baseball. And so I told him, I said, when we start this, he would beat us if it had to be kids that made A's. He would be like, now, not all of us can make straight A's. So we look for kids who are athletes. They can apply if they're not athletes. But we look for kids who are dynamic in the way that they treat other people, the way that they live their lives, and the way they exemplify Christ. And so the first year we gave 1, this year we gave 3, and all 3 of those athletes are going to different colleges, playing baseball at different places, at different levels. And, 2 of them we really didn't know. One we had met, was a member of his baseball team, and the other 2 we got to meet. And so I keep up with them and their families, and I just think, I would have never known those kids otherwise. And like one of them is playing down south. I won't say which school because, it's not necessarily the one I cheer for. But he's playing baseball down south, and I've seen him just this month going out to different ministries with that team and ministering Christ to children, to other players. And I think, wow. The child that won the scholarship last year, the first year, he actually used his scholarship, and he's already working as a lineman, and he went to help the victims of the tornado. It's just amazing. And so that's a legacy, an extra layer to that legacy of meeting kids that we don't. This year we had thousands of applications from all over the state, literally all the way to the coast. And I just am amazed. How did they hear about Chris Lucius?
Yeah. Now, what are ways that y'all are able to keep that foundation funded?
Well, we have done a fishing tournament, a bass fishing tournament, but I'm going to be honest, it has been a hard-fought road because that is a sport that's changing with the addition of computer technology. So, I don't know, we may adapt and do some different things. Chris loved fishing, he loved hunting, he loved sports of all kinds. So we have a big foundation meeting coming up before the end of the year, and we may or may not continue our fishing tournament, but we will do something in the realm of fishing, hunting, or educating kids in that area, or sports. So just kind of be on the lookout for Chris Lucius Memorial Foundation.com.
All right. Well, I thank you so much for talking to us today. I love you too, Miss Joy. And you're such an inspiration. You really are. Even on days that you don't feel like it, you're really an inspiration.
I have to be honest, I cried all day yesterday thinking, Lord, what can I possibly say on Megan's podcast that would honor you? Because nothing that comes out of my mouth can help other people unless it's filled with the hope of Jesus Christ. That's all we have. But it's more than enough.
Yep, it is. And I want to thank everybody for watching. I want to thank Boast for Souls for sponsoring our podcast, and Word of Life Church for helping us out with a place to do our podcast. And we'll see you guys next week. Thanks.